You are living in the most dangerous time in American history.
We won't take a single back step.
Former professional basketball player is now the Republican Party's choice.
Can you imagine Royce White, the U.S. Senate?
White won the endorsement on May 18th with 67% of the vote.
There's nothing that guarantees we win, but I guarantee you if we lose, we will die. Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us. Help fund the movement, help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I'm your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Today is October 21st, Tuesday, October 21st, year of our Lord, 2025. When we left last night, I said that we'd be doing the show daily from here on out, and here we are, Tuesday evening. First time, or one of the rare times we've done a Tuesday evening show, but this will be a part of the weekly schedule from now on, Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. Central, so make sure that you set your calendar, your timer, or your subscription on YouTube. I know a lot of people will subscribe to the channel. They get mysteriously unsubscribed for some reason, and that's okay. We know we're dealing with censorship and shadow banning, but nonetheless, if you get a chance, hit the like button, subscribe, leave some comments, share if you can on social media. All of those things help. When I left off last night, I was saying how, more or less, the black community is a great example of the sharp decline in our country. And we can look at a number of cultural indicators to tell us a lot. Most of all, the music. If you've been following my Remember Normal series on X, I'm posting a lot of old music from the black community, a lot of 60s and 70s, soul, R&B, just great all-around music. At the time, it wasn't really considered a genre, R&B or soul. It was pop, because the music was popular amongst white people and black people. And as I posted, you'll see a lot of my audience, especially people who are white and of that age demographic, that boomer demographic, are very moved by the memory of that music and the time period or the era that coincided. So, it's not nothing. And I start this episode off by reminding people that there have been a number of scientific experiments done where a scientist will take two plants. One plant they will talk to in a positive way, give compliments and praise and so on and so forth. And the results will be that plant will flourish, as opposed to the other plant in the study where they insult and put down and talk mean to, so to speak. And there's actually a physical power that our words have in the universe. And it's just a profound phenomenon, a profound thing for mankind to discover. And I think it goes unacknowledged, underappreciated, underutilized, underrealized in our society, in our culture, especially the black community. And I say that as an example. Does anybody really believe that the music, particularly gangster rap, drill rap, trap music in the black community doesn't have an impact or isn't influencing young black men in particular, but some of both, men and women, but young black Americans to be involved in violent, chaotic, and self-destructive behavior? I would say it's almost a given that the music is having a broad impact, or broad enough for us to be unhappy with the results on our communities. And we have to do something about that. But first, we have to be honest. And I get the sense that content, information, music being one of those mediums comes so fast and furious, especially at the young people. Whatever's popular at the time becomes dominant, becomes prominent, and the rest of history becomes lost. So to start here, I just want to take you back to a song that I had prepared by a group, uh, an R&B group from back in the day called Royce. And this is "I Want to Get Next to You." And what's funny about it is I grew up on music like this. Um, I grew up on music like this, and even in my generation, I was born in '91. My mom was born in, I want to say I was born in '91. She must have been born in '68, '68, maybe, yeah, maybe '68, '69. So she lived through that era. She grew up with that music, but by the time I was born in her 20s, she was still listening to those things. And my grandparents, I was fortunate enough to have two sets of living grandparents. Maybe that's why I relate so well to the boomers, because I was raised in large part single mother, but I was raised in large part by two sets of living grandparents, and even had great grandparents that were alive. And so, the things that influenced my thought process, especially when it came to music, which you didn't listen to all day, every day. You listened to on occasion if somebody had a record player, if there was a radio that was playing, music at grandpa's house, or maybe there was a long car ride, a trip somewhere, road trip, and the music of their choice, or the music that they listened to became the music that you listened to. But you didn't have the option to listen to whatever you wanted all day, every day, all week, all month, all year long. And I think that even that in itself put a lot of separation between young men, young men and the parts of culture that would have warped our thinking. We had pushback, we had guardrails, we had some sort of balance. You could watch it, and Tupac must have, came out in '96. And even Tupac, for example, Tupac was an incredible artist. He had great success. A lot of what he became was a symbol of thug life, infamously tattooed on his stomach. And you kind of you live by the sword, you die by the sword, you live by the gun, you die by the gun. And that was Tupac's story. He was shot multiple times, shot multiple times on multiple occasions, the last one being the one that ended his life. Now, there's a lot of conspiracy theory out there, and has been for many, many years, that Tupac is still alive somewhere and he faked his own death, probably mostly fed by the fact that one of his very popular albums, entitled Machiavelli, kind of played on a narrative about him faking his own death in some ways. So, but either way, as the story goes, Tupac was shot and killed in the '90s, and I was a kid at the time. But Tupac's music was very popular. It was very well produced. He was very influential, and he was very influential on culture. He was very influential on the black community, especially the young black community. But even Tupac, uh, when you listen to him rap, he was very articulate. When you listen to him talk, he was very articulate. And he was thinking about things. He was what people used to call conscious. Now they call it woke. And, there's a far cry difference between conscious and woke. Woke is kind of the decadent, illogical, ultra warped version of what conscious used to mean in the black community. But Tupac was a conscious individual. He was wrestling with things about being a citizen, being black, being a man, being young, government, and what it all meant. Was he right? Did he have the right take on a lot of things in hindsight? No. But at least he was wrestling with those things. And in his music, you could hear what he was thinking. You could hear that he was thinking. Now, and I listen to some of this rap music, and mostly because I help coach my son, who's 14 years old. He'll be 15 later on this year. And I have another son who's 12, and I have two daughters that are in the same age range. And I help coach a lot of the young basketball players coming up here in the state of Minnesota. And so I get to hear some of the things that they're listening to. And, I see things as well, just on the internet. And it's so strange how much music has changed just in my lifetime. I feel almost old saying that now. Shit, I am getting kind of old. 34 years old. I'll be 35 in April. But I guess I am getting kind of old. You can see the grays on my beard, and it's also strange because when we were young and we listened to rap music, and of course rap music had a huge boom in the 90s, starting with NWA, and then you had a lot of those East Coast rappers as well, Run DMC. You know, you had a lot of those early onset of rap music, and then came the gangster rap, and then music kind of just, or gangster rap and hip hop just kind of exploded from there, really, and all the way through the 2000s up until now. And I grew up in that era, in the hip hop, rap era, and I watched the progression. And it was funny because even when I was a kid, you had your grandfather, your uncles, your great grandparents, even your parents that would tell you that's not music. They didn't listen to that music. They didn't listen to it with you. They didn't like it. They didn't enjoy it. They didn't condone it. They didn't have an appreciation for it for the most part in my household, in my life. And maybe that's why I never really fell deep into the streets the way some of my peers did, because I'm sure there are households where that music was listened to, condoned, and appreciated, and and very influential. It wasn't in my household, and it wasn't in my family. Um, but I mean, I remember even getting having a Tupac album and taking my own money and buying a rap album here and there, and your parents, your uncles, your mother, your grandparents, they didn't condone the music. They always told you, that ain't no real music. You got to listen to some real music. And they would reference it. And you knew what they were talking about because you heard them play it. And you kind of fought against it because you were young and it's like, yeah, you don't know what's cool. My best friend at school or the kids at school think this is cool. And it's interesting because back then the internet wasn't a thing, but even then there was a very, in my opinion, concerted effort to push the most chaotic, violent, and self-destructive music on the youth. Now, maybe in some social psychological analysis of what went on, maybe the younger people were just drawn to the younger music, and that hip hop had just sort of popped on the scene, and so there were younger people making hip hop music. So in that way, it related to what the young people were going through or experiencing out there in the community. But either way, you had some pushback. You had some pushback. I'm going to play this Royce song, and um, it's just an example of where black music was, and then where it ended up being. Um, yeah, Royce. I want to get next to you. Classic.
Sitting here in this chair, waiting on you, oh baby, to see things my way. But not a word do you say, you won't even look my way. Yeah.
And even there, just the feeling of the music. I mean, it's interesting. Like anytime I hear old music, there's a feeling that you get of a time that was better. It's why I'm, in many ways, I'm drawn to the MAGA movement and the idea of making America great again, because I remember a time, even in the '90s, when America was much simpler. And then I have reference of a time in America even before I was born, through music and art and movies and elders and their stories, their oral stories about their childhood, and it seemed like America was a better place. Now, was it perfect? Absolutely not. Right? The civil rights movement happened, and there was real segregation. But again, the boomers, by my account, the ones that I talked to, all unanimously agree that after the civil rights movement, there was a brief period of collapse in racial tension that in the early 70s, all the way up until the 80s or maybe the mid 80s, that the racial tension had all but subsided and black and white people were partying together. They were hanging out together. They were listening to the same music, going to the same concerts. The schools had become integrated and people were figuring out how to deal with that. And so it was much different than the way the story is told by the mainstream media today, or the way that the story is taught in our schools. Even myself growing up in the 90s, if you look at American history, or if you're in American history, they make it seem like everything before, up until the day you're in that class reading about American history, was racial hatred and violence towards one another between blacks and whites. And that's just not the sense. That's not the story that I get from people that I know, family. Not only just real blood relatives, but extended and immediate family friends that may be of a different race that lived in the same community. I can't tell you how many of my family members, my blood relatives, whether they be aunts, uncles, grandfather, have white friends. A great example of that is my grandfather, Frank White, who doesn't share my political views. Actually, Mother Jones, wrote an article, and they interviewed him, and he was very critical of my support of President Trump and my affiliation with the Republican Party. And that put a strain on our relationship, but I love him, and he helped raise me, and much of who I am today has a lot to do with the type of man that he was, and that he was thoughtful. He always made sure that I knew how to shake hands firm and look people in their eyes when I met them, and spoke up, and that I thought about things, that I was a critical thinker. Sometimes when I was young, I didn't. And my grandfather would be disappointed. And I would actually feel sad to disappoint him because of how he carried himself in his own life. But that happens in families. Politics is supposed to be polarizing in some respects. But my reason in bringing up my grandpa Frank, number one, I called him last night and I asked him, does he think Shohei Ohtani is the greatest baseball player of all time? And he said maybe. And the reason that's significant is my grandfather has always been very involved in the baseball community here in Minnesota. He's been one of the writers and historians for the National League Negro League Museum there in Kansas City, and he is like a brother to Dave Winfield, the great Dave Winfield, one of the greatest athletes to ever live, let alone come from Minnesota. And his brother Steve. And I grew up around those guys, right? I grew up around my grandfather and Steve Winfield, who's his best friend, the brother of Dave. And Dave is great and was an incredible athlete, drafted in 3 sports, doesn't even happen anymore. And he could really play all the sports as well. But I called him last night and asked him, was Shohei Ohtani the best player of all time? And then I called Uncle Dave, and he didn't answer, but I'm going to get on the phone with him and get his opinion. As an aside, what Shohei Ohtani is doing is absolutely unbelievable. And I grew up a baseball fan as well, and I don't think I've ever seen anything even remotely close. But there are a lot of good players throughout history, respect to all of them. But anyway, my grandfather grew up in a neighborhood, Rondo, in St. Paul, our capital city, where he was friends with the Mauer family. If you're familiar with Joe Mauer, another Hall of Fame baseball player, another great athlete himself, very good in both baseball and football out of Cretin Durham Hall. His uncle is Kenny Mauer, who is the Hall of Fame referee. I had him on the show, and I think he's done his tour, a number of tours around the conservative media regarding his fight with the NBA, who essentially tried to force him to get vaccinated as an NBA official, and he said no. He said, I don't want to be vaccinated, and I'm going to exercise my religious exemption, or I want a religious exemption. And the NBA actually told him that the Pope that the Pope said that people should get vaccinated, so he didn't deserve a religious exemption, which is kind of bizarre to even say, because as a Catholic, I recognize the Pope as the earthly authority of the church, but Kenny Mauer is not a Catholic, and I also respect that there are, multiple denominations, and the Pope may not be an authority for your Protestants and evangelicals. So it was just a strange situation. All of that aside, my point is that Kenny Mauer and my grandfather and my grandfather's friends, were very close and all had great relationships growing up. To this day, they still talk on the phone. They still call each other. They still hang out. Kenny Mauer's white. My grandfather's black and Mexican. Even my grandmother, I showed a picture of her online the other day on X. And you know what? Maybe I'll bring it up here so you can see it. It's a great example of exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to, um, you know, race relations and not judging a book by its cover, and just how the story is told about race and then how it really plays out in America. And I'll bring this up here in a moment once I can get my profile. Okay, here we go. It's kind of odd being on here on a laptop, usually on your phone. But so I posted a picture of my grandmother, and it's from the 70s. My mother's in her lap, and she's just a little baby, so it must have been in the 70s. You could tell by the hairstyle. Here we go, right here. Um, okay, so we're already up. So I posted this, and I'll read it for you here, just so you can see what my thought process was. I said, "Hold the line. We're not far right. We're just right. I used to be caught up in the race narrative myself, which is true. My own growth gives me great hope for our country. I wasn't deeply bought into it, the race narrative, but it was convenient and easy. It didn't used to be taught overtly. Recently it has been, but it was subtly suggested to us time and time again growing up in America. As I started to get more serious about politics and history in my 20s, I began to see the race narrative for what it truly was. Not that there isn't racism, but that the narrative is a tool, a distraction, and a scapegoat. When I really took a step back from the convenient everything is racism narrative and tried to address deep political and social issues, the narrative didn't stand up to my own internal scrutiny. Take this picture, for example, which is why I always say it's dangerous to judge people by the color of their skin. My grandmother, Sandra, now late 70s, is 50% black and 50% white. Obviously, she looks white, but is she? Sometime after George Floyd died, I realized that the left's criticism of white people in American history was far less about the betterment of blacks and much more about political power. And it wasn't really fine-tuned. It wasn't really a fine-tuned critique. It was more of a hatred, blind to nuance and detail. The kind of blind hatred that would see my own grandmother possibly mistaken for only a white person, to someone motivated enough by the woke mob. And what's wrong with my white Norwegian great grandmother, Doris, who is Sandra's mother, for that matter, anyway? I mean, what's wrong with my great grandmother? She married a black man. Am I to hate her as well? Once I got through that, all my immediate loved ones, then one day it hit me. Do they really want me to hate all white people? All white people are naturally racist? Well, how does that make sense? What about the white people who are telling me all white people are racist? Are they racist too? A resounding no and awkwardness follows with the would-be vanguards of American race relations. So there's more here, but you can read it on your own. Here's a picture of my grandmother, and you can see, if you can see, I mean, yeah, she looks white. I mean, there's no doubt about it. She looks white, but she isn't. She's 50% white, 50% black. Her father, Milton Pryor, who you can look up in some of the Minnesota records, was one of the first black police officers in the city of St. Paul. He walked the beat in the city of St. Paul. Yeah, one of the first, I don't know, dozen black police officers in our capital city, St. Paul. And her mother was first generation daughter of an immigrant family. So she was the first one born here in the United States from a Norwegian immigrant family. Her mother and her mother's several brothers or sisters came straight from Norway. Most famous of which is probably my great grandmother Doris's uncle, Alfred Auery, who was the dean of the dentistry school at the University of Minnesota and Columbia in the 1930s. And he was very well known in the dental community for having transformed dental science. Here, I'll look him up too, since we got this whole thing rolling and this whole interactive piece now. We can kind of pull stuff up here and do it like that. which I like. I like that we have more interaction. And Alfred is a little bit difficult to find here. He came from an era where, let's see if we go to the University of Minnesota. I think that's where they had. Anyway, he's a very, accomplished science, dentist and doctor. Back then, he was an MD as well, and he helped transform dentistry, the entire industry, the entire way that dentistry was taught. Uh, it used to be that the dental practice was taught singularly as a trade, and Dr. Alfred, my great great uncle Dr. Alfred, helped merge dental hygiene and dental science into the 4-year collegiate curriculum, which was just a profound turn of how things were done. And he was very good friends with Dr. Mayo. He was very good friends with Dr. William Guys. These guys worked on commissions um, for the Carnegie Foundation and things like that. So, I mean, and my whole point, even bringing that up, isn't to toot my own horn or to talk about my family's legacy. I'm proud of my family in some ways. Dr. Alfred Oury was a Freemason, so I'm in disagreement with his Freemason affiliation. And actually, he had two offices, one at the University of Minnesota and the other was at the Minneapolis Masonic Lodge, which means that he was probably really high up in the Freemason order. And I completely, denounce Freemasonry as a whole. But it's funny, he was a Norwegian Quaker, came straight from Norway, used to take his students on these long walks from the Twin Cities all the way back to his hometown there in Duluth, and he was white. I mean, it doesn't get any more white than Norwegian, and that's why my grandmother looks white, even though she's 50% black. And the whole thing is, what if she was all white? I mean, what if she was white? There's nothing wrong with being white. And it's just not taught like that. It's not taught like that. And I'm sorry to interrupt the song and go on this tangent. I'm going to go back and, and play the song now, but there's something intentional has been done and been done very well to stoke racial hatred in this country, and I think it has a lot to do with the music and the subculture, the subtext of the music culture in this country.
Girl, I'm spending my dimes, wasting my time, talking till I'm black and blue. Oh, can't you see? I wanna get next to you.
I mean, how do you not love that? That just makes you feel good.
Dreams of you and I go sailing by. Whenever your eyes meet mine, you're so fine. And girl, you make me feel so insecure. You're so beautiful and pure. Why must you be unkind and tell me I'm not your kind? Blowing my mind. Girl, my money is low, and I know.
And was there crime then? Of course, right? I mean, it wasn't like there weren't problems in the black community then, because there were, but the problems were far cry different than they are now. And I'm going to show you something else here, just to frame what I see as a 34-year-old looking out today at the black community and some of the music. And this is NBA YoungBoy, who is probably the most popular rapper of this young generation. If you had to put a rank to it, and here, I mean, just look at the energy here. And I'm gonna play it a couple of times because it's only 12 seconds, 13 seconds, but even the text here, young boy had YN crashing out. YN is short for youngin or young nigger. Or I don't even really know what YN stands for. I know what they mean when they say it. I'm not sure what the actual abbreviation is. I think it is youngin, if I'm not mistaken. But young nigga would also be uh, appropriate. And it is appropriate. I mean, even the term crashing out. It's funny, this white liberal woman that filmed me on TikTok counter protesting the communists up in Zimmerman, Minnesota, used the same terminology. And it's just funny how some of these terms catch on, like crashing out. Crashing out it came from the neighborhood. I know what the term crashing out means. I was there when it first popped up. And it was meant to reference somebody who was emotionally unstable, who didn't really feel like they had a future, who had given up on life and society, and was willing to do something that was very self-destructive and detrimental to their own life and somebody else's. That's what crashing out was, was meant to mean. And this white liberal woman, I guess, said that I was crashing out because I was counter protesting the communists at a Republican Party event where I was speaking. She obviously doesn't understand the reference, or she's trying to, make, play fast and loose with the reference for her own, I don't know, cool points on liberal TikTok. I don't know. It's just it's corny to me. Really, it's just corny. You're a white liberal woman. You live in Zimmerman, Minnesota. You don't know anything about people crashing out, and that's why liberal policy, Democrat policy, is so out of touch with what's really going on in these neighborhoods. Even if they live there or work there, they tend to live in such an isolated bubble that they don't really understand, or maybe they do and just don't care, the ramifications of their culture, of the Democrat culture. And when I mean the culture, I mean the policy, and even more importantly, the worldview and the philosophy that informs the way that we're governed over, and the way that our young people are taught, and the way they're held accountable or not held accountable. Let's look at this video here. This is at an NBA YoungBoy concert, and I'll let you, form an opinion. I'm just letting it play on a loop here. It's only about 12, 13 seconds. But, I mean, there's a manic, chaotic sort of trance that takes place. And the thing about it is it just rap music? No. No, because, we know there are plenty of heavy metal and rock and roll concerts where people are very, very hyped up, let's say, crashing out. Some of these mosh pit and these ragers got crazy too, right? Even some of these electronic dubstep pop, electro pop clubs and things had a crazy element to it. I'm not saying that it's only hip hop music, right? I mean, there was an entire era where even the disco was very closely associated with the use of cocaine. You look at stories about clubs like I think it's Studio 54, or some of those New York City clubs that had very famous discos, and drug use, cocaine use was very closely associated with the music as well, and the club scene. And the pop music, the electro pop music, there was the ecstasy and the cocaine, and there was drug use, but there's a difference. And the difference is, just statistically speaking, the difference is what's being talked about in this music is very different from what's being talked about in heavy metal, or in the disco, or even in electronic music. The message is very different. It may have the same energy, it may have the same passion, it may have the same hype to it, but the words are very different. And you can see in his body language that he's, imitating fighting, being violent. The music is talking about shooting somebody, which is, common. The entire drill genre of rap music is based on the idea of young black men being involved in either gang culture or just, what they call clique culture, and shooting each other for very trivial things, mostly jealousy and now social media beefs. It was used to in the 70s. I mean, it was, I'm selling heroin. You can't be selling heroin here. This is my area. I catch you selling heroin here again, I'm gonna kill you. And that happened, right? Today, I don't even really know if these young kids are selling drugs or there's even an industry for drugs because marijuana used to be a big part of the underworld of the drug industry, and marijuana is mostly legal in most places across the country, or the laws have been deconstructed so much around marijuana that there's no really need to hide. Obviously, crack and methamphetamine and fentanyl and some of these other drugs that are now plaguing the black community in the entire country are being sold, but they're being sold in a very decentralized way, mostly at the behest of the cartel and a point man probably who's, has a local distributor who's also involved with the cartel who's getting these young people a product to sell on their own, and they're organizing the distribution as to where in the past, back in the day, there were huge crime organizations led by one or two or maybe a dozen older, most of the time older individuals in their respective communities, whether they were Dominican, Puerto Rican, Black, Mexican, whoever it is, those individual communities had people who were in charge of an actual organization like the American Mafia, the Italian Mafia, and there was a hierarchy of power. And am I saying that things were less violent? No, but they were violent for a different reason. And you have to account for that. You have to say, what is this young 15-year-old kid so upset about? I, I don't understand it. To me, when I listen to I Want to Get Next to You, that's more of what a young 15-year-old boy who has raging hormones and it should kind of be in that thought process, more of a young hopeless romantic than ready to crash out and throw his life away and take somebody else's life for no reason, essentially. And see, this is the me. I'm going to play it again because I don't think it can be stressed enough what this represents. The energy here. The energy here is demonic, in my opinion. There's a very heavy demonic influence. And it's not just this young man. We see this young man and the spotlight's on him, and I don't mean to be unfair, by making him the symbol or example of what's wrong with the black community, although he rightly is. But you got to realize there's an entire stadium full of people at this concert, and they all see young people like this acting like this, and they look the other way. They think it's okay because they're acting like that. And I do see some 30 and 40-year-olds that go to this type of concert with this type of music, and they're right there with the young people. So it's not all on the young people as well. Is it mostly the young people? Of course, because as you get older, you grow up and you realize time is limited, what's important in life, and you want to stop wasting time and focus on things like your children or your grandchildren or whatever it is that you got going on, your job, career, hobbies, financial stability, girlfriend, whatever. You as you get older, you just take time more seriously, which is a natural progression of human beings. But this says something about the culture. It really does. So play it again. At least the kid has an American flag on his T-shirt, so there's some hope there. But scary, even more scary than just the overall energy is, doesn't look like he can throw a punch. And this is a problem in the black community. We've done such a poor job of teaching young men how to be young men, putting them in things like boxing and wrestling and martial arts and things that, we used to do a lot more. My great-grandfather on my grandfather's side, Frank White's father, had a brother named Eugene White. We called him Uncle Genie Boy. His nickname was Rock, Uncle Rock, and Uncle Rock was a very well-known boxing coach in the city of St. Paul for decades. He was a boxer, and he taught many young people how to box. I had a white guy come up to me at the state fair and say, You don't know me. You wouldn't know me. I've never met you before, but I knew your Uncle Genie Boy. I knew your Uncle Rock. He taught me how to box. And, it's just, first of all, when you learn a martial art, you have a respect for violence. You have a respect for, how dangerous violence is and how serious it is and how slow you should be to violence if you can avoid it. And this kind of is just kind of playfully dealing with violence. And the young kid doesn't look like he can throw a punch. And so what happens, he gets into a fight. He doesn't know how to throw a punch. He gets beat up or knocked out. Guy he's fighting, maybe by luck, maybe the guy he's fighting knows how to throw a punch for whatever reason. Maybe he's just a little bit bigger and stronger than him at the time, 15 years old. There's a lot of separation in strength and size and physical maturity. But then he wants to come back and shoot the guy because he lost a fight. And this happens all the time. This happens all the time. Every day across this country, every day in Black America, somebody gets into a fight, they lose the fight, and they think, I'm so embarrassed, or my pride is so hurt, my ego's so hurt, and my reputation is so hurt that I have to come back and kill this person or shoot this person to make up for it. And that, to me, that's just cowardly. That is a very significant indicator of the decay in Black America. It's like, you can't take an ass whooping. There's nothing wrong with getting your ass whooped. And I get sometimes people get knocked out, they fall, bump their head, and die. That's a real thing as well. That happens. That happens, and that's unfortunate. And, people should be slow to violence for that reason. But that's not the majority of what's going on in the streets or in the Black community. The majority of what's going on is my pride is hurt, my ego is hurt. My body's not even that hurt. My body's not even physically damaged. There was a 30-second fight, a 20-second fight, and to everybody else, it looked like he got the best of me, and I just can't have that. So I got to come back and shoot this person. It's cowardly, it's ridiculous in its logic, and it's a sign of a people, a culture that doesn't see a future for themselves outside of the opinions of other people. When you stop caring about the opinions of other people so much, it allows you to think clearly in the best interest of yourself. It's part of the reason why Black people vote Democrats so much. Mostly is because we think that there's a norm that we have to live up to politically when we're at the barbershop or when we're at the hair salon or when we're in public or when we're in company with other Black people. We think there's a Blackness we're supposed to act like. And this has become a part of that culture. You can act like it's not the case, but I question how many young people you're actually hanging around, because I'm at the varsity basketball games here in Minnesota all the time. And for all the schools that have young Black kids at them, our young Black kids are acting like they're out of control. And the staff are having trouble, talking to them, redirecting them, keeping them under control, keeping them focused. The same thing they're reporting in the schools. And we can say that that's on white people, but then if we get to that level, well, it's Democrats that are teaching your kids. If we want to go all the way down to the bottom of the rabbit hole and still blame white people in some capacity, the only white people left to blame are the Democrats, the liberal white folks that you let teach your students, or the administrators, or the administrators who come from liberal universities and liberal social science programs that have the same woke ideology that President Trump is trying to fight right now. But I don't even want to do that. Let's focus on us. I want to get next to you. What happened to that culture? Even the patience of it. I'm going back now to the song, and give me one brief moment. I don't want to be switching content here while I'm in that screen. But I want to go back to this music. And you can hear the difference in the motivation. I don't know all 14 members from Royce. They probably had a lot of problems. But what they created and what they represented had an entirely different energy. The motivation was different. And sure, it was about love. It was about love. There's nothing wrong with love. It can being too dependent on companionship and love from women be a problem? Can that be a problem too? For sure. For sure. That can be a problem. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. That can be a problem. And that's been a problem in the black community too. And in many ways, we were strategically and systematically forced out of the homes through the welfare program. We know how that whole thing went down. That's how gangs started, right? You had these big high rises built, these projects built. I'm gonna have some former gang members on the show and interview them to talk about that change in the 60s and 70s here in the future, because it's good to hear it straight from a person who was there. That'll tell you the truth about how it went down. But you had these projects built in a place like Chicago, and the mom was incentivized to kick the dad out of the house to be able to get welfare. And with the dads missing, you know, they continued to live on. They went somewhere else. They went on about their business, and maybe should they had stayed right down at the bottom of the housing project to make sure that their sons were raised properly, for sure. In hindsight, that was certainly an option that was not exercised, but people still had to work, still had to try and make money, still had to try and survive in a respectable and decent way. And so you had all these young boys now, down in the front of the projects with no guidance, with no male leadership, while their moms were upstairs dealing with the other kids or maybe going to work or whatever the case may be. And they formed gangs. And this was back in the 60s and 70s. So I'm not saying that these artists, that Royce didn't have problems, that people didn't have problems in the 60s or 70s or in the 80s or even the 90s, but the motivation was different. You can feel a difference in the motivation. And if you can't feel that, if you're not honest about that, then you're probably not interested in, the betterment of black people. Like I said in the X post, you're not interested in the betterment of black people. You're interested in black people as a tool, whether you're black or white or anybody else for that matter. It's the same with white people. Are you really worried about the suicide rate, in white America? Are you really worried about the suicide rate amongst our veterans? Are you really worried about the profound mental health crisis that we see? No, you're just using it as a political football, or racial political football. I don't like it. I'm sick of it. Seriously. And maybe I'm uniquely positioned to speak on it because I come from a family where my grandmother's family was Norwegian. And my grandfather, Frank White, his mother was a first-generation immigrant from Mexico. So he was half black, half Mexican. My grandfather, half black, half Mexican. My grandmother, half black, half Norwegian. Black, Mexican, and Norwegian. That's what I am. And that kind of is the fabric of this country. When you think about the history of America and you think about the fabric of this country, the Mexicans, the early Mexicans that immigrated here, the blacks that were either here or brought here on slave ships, depending on which history you want to take, and white people, European immigrants. That was the initial fabric of this country. And it's going to be, and honestly, I say this and I bring this culture up like I said I would yesterday. I bring this up because it's going to be imperative for those three groups of people to save this republic, to create a new standard, like the Hispanic working class is down in the Rio Grande Valley, or like some of the blacks are all across the country, to say, all of this political uh, WWE division is bullshit. All of the race war, the emboldened sort of jet fueled race war that it appears everybody wants, isn't going to help anybody. It just isn't. And that doesn't mean we can't talk about race. We can talk about race. Just like the group Royce could talk about love. They could talk about relationships. They could talk about sex even. But it's how you do it. It's how you do it. It's why you do it. That's more important. What's the motivation? When I hear a song like I Want to Get Next to You, I think that the person singing it or the people who wrote it or the group or whatever, they have a genuine interest in a productive romance. Do all romances end productively? No. No, some of them end terribly in tragedy and sadness and heartbreak. But what is my motivation? Just because my motivation is a thing doesn't mean that's going to be the outcome necessarily, but the motivation is still important. That's an IQ point we have to reinsert into the culture. My motivation could be one thing, and I not get the result of my initial motivation, but that doesn't make the motivation less important. The motivation is important. The motivation is not only going to inform the journey, which is usually most important when you set out to do anything, and then it's going to also inform how I react when I have to confront the results. So the motivation used to be different. It used to be way different in the black community. I just want to finish the song. I want to get next to you. Get that afro. Nice suit, though. Fly suits and fly clothes in the 60s and 70s.
Whatever it takes to please you, I'm willing to do. 'Cause you're my dream come true, and I wanna get next to you, baby.
Now this group Royce is also famous for the song "Car Wash," and there are a bunch of great Royce songs, and we'll play some other ones at some other time. But this was one of those songs that now when they make a movie, about that time period, you'll often hear "I Want to Get Next to You" used. It was famously used in the beginning of Ice Cube's movie Friday, one of the Friday movies. I think it was the first one, if I'm not mistaken. But it's just one of those famous songs. And, we have to deal with culture. We have to deal with culture. That's why Tuesdays and Thursdays I decided to start doing a show just to deal with culture. And I hope you're enjoying the show today about culture. I mean, this is an important thing. It's not a nothing thing. It's a big deal. The question is, do we get caught up in a culture war? Do we get caught up in cultural wedge issues? And when I say caught up, I mean, do we enter them to actually come up with an issue, to actually observe and analyze and say what needs to be said? Or are we more invested in not getting anywhere? It's always an option to not get anywhere. I've said this before. I used to say it on Jason Whitlock's show. And I spoke with him the other day through text message, and I hope he's doing well, and God bless him. I've never been an enemy of Jason, and we had our disagreement, but hopefully one day we can get on the show and have a comeback show or whatnot. But anyway, I used to say this on Jason Whitlock's show. I said, and we all get to decide how the country burns now. It's that bad. It's that bad. It really is. It's that bad now where there are only two choices. All the easy answers are behind us. There are two choices now. We can have sane, logical, reasonable people step up and say, I want to help represent this country, its people, and a movement back towards prosperity and well-being. We can do that, and the hard work that comes along with it, the tedious hard work that comes along with it, because it's never easy to climb back up a hill, or we can all devolve into our own division and continue to be conquered the way we have up until this point. Now, when I say remember normal, I say it with hesitation because, in my opinion, the social engineers that executed the agenda they had for what you see today were already getting to work when this music was coming out. In the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, certainly in the 2000s. And I think the onset of social media and the internet, the advent of the internet and social media, was a significant shift in the history of human civilization for obvious reasons. But there's with what they call Gutenberg revolutions, right? Like the printing press, the internet was also one. When you have a Gutenberg revolution, there is great danger, an increased danger, an increased risk. The stakes are raised, but you also have positives that come with it as well. And where would we be in this country today if we didn't have the internet? If President Trump wasn't able to break through the power of the mainstream media and the control that our ultra wealthy corporate and financial elites have on information in this country and all around the world, where would America be? If we just read the headlines from the local mainstream media television channel or newspaper and said Kamala Harris must be our choice. It's the only choice that makes sense. President Trump is unfit. Without alternative media, without the internet, without social media, President Trump doesn't get elected. And does that mean that social media is a good thing? No. No thing is one thing or another, except pedophilia and child abuse or human trafficking or murder. Right? The Bible pretty much helped laid out the balls and strikes on what is definitively good and what is definitively evil. And we continue to fight against that as best we can for perverse reasons, obviously. But most things outside of the big ones, most things aren't one thing or another. It's more of how they're used. It's the argument for the Second Amendment. Are guns a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, depends on who's holding it. Depends on how it's used. Same with government. Is government a good thing or a bad thing? Depends on how it's used. Is a computer or mobile phone a good thing or a bad thing? It depends on how it's used. It depends on how much it's used. Is an apple a good thing or a bad thing? Apples tend to be good no matter how you slice it, but you could probably eat enough apples to get yourself in some trouble too. Far much more difficult to do. But you get what I'm saying. It the internet, the advent of the internet, and all the things that came before it, that was normal for us at one time. You know, in the 60s, the civil rights movement and the people who wanted to use that for ill purposes, for an ill agenda, that was normal at the time. In the 70s, in the 80s, during the Reagan administration, and the neoconservative movement that came out of it, the security state that was erected around the war on drugs, or in the 1990s, the war in the Middle East, the entire military industrial complex set up around the Middle East. The 2000s with the Patriot Act. That there was a normal in 2000. And I do remember the 2000s, and I do remember 9/11 being a more significant shift in the energy of this country and the energy of our entire global society that doesn't really get much acknowledgement ex post facto. I really do think 9/11 and the .com boom, the internet boom, were two of the most significant changes of my lifetime in you know in American culture. Things really changed, and they changed quick, and the progression of where we went as a society happened really fast. But they say that of every decade. And you look from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s, and you look at the music. Look how the music changed. It's a sign that things change fast. They really do. It's funny how many things stay the same. As fast as some things change, some things it seems just tend to stay the same. In the 50s, you had the Elvis sort of what they call it, the heartthrobs. They had the doo-wop sort of sound of Frankie Valli and those kind of people in the 50s, and then the 60s it's dominated by the black soul movement, you could say. And then the 70s was obviously the disco, and then the 80s was also disco but electronic, and you had these legendary classic rock bands in the 80s. Not that there weren't great rock bands in the 70s and the 60s as well, Beatles, Rolling Stones, so on and so forth. But in the 80s, you had these classic rock bands that really came to the forefront, as well as the start of African Bambaataa and the rap thing. And then the 90s, gangster rap just exploded. And then in 2000s, it just continued to take off. And, you had pop music, you had boy bands, you had NSYNC, you had Backstreet Boys, you had, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, you had the Disney kids, Bieber, so, I mean, not Bieber, but Timberlake, and then you had Bieber, and so music even progresses fast, and that's why I think it's important to look at music, and you can see how fast things change, and they really do. But some things stay the same. And when I say remember normal, I just mean whatever's going on today, whatever's in the water, whatever's out there in the zeitgeist, in the ethos, you know, it feels different in its motivation. It feels much darker. It feels like the dark forces who engineered it back when things seemed better have gotten their way, have gotten their wish, have gotten exactly what they wanted. And look at the black communities. The murder rate is out of control. It really is. It really is. So I'm going to move on here. I want to revisit something that I brought up yesterday regarding the Rhino establishment. Um, Here, I'm going to bring this back up. It just dawned on me yesterday when I was done with the episode, because we focused so much on the Star Tribune. I forgot to mention that, or I forgot to mention in detail, that the owner of the Star Tribune is a former Minnesota Republican state legislator. Also, interestingly, former owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx, Glenn Taylor. And look, I don't really know Glenn Taylor. I was drafted to the NBA. I had a workout with the Minnesota Timberwolves. I grew up around Minnesota Timberwolves players. I grew up admiring and looking up to the Minnesota Timberwolves as a young basketball player myself. The Kevin Garnett years were great, even though we didn't win a championship, but there were some great memories and moments. And Kevin Garnett, as a competitor, really helped shape who I became as a basketball player. And I looked up to Kevin Garnett because he was everything that an athlete should be. He was unselfish. He worked hard. He brought passion. He didn't miss many games. I mean, he was reliable. He was tough. He was gritty, and he'd run through a brick wall to try and win. And that used to be the way of things. He wasn't the only one, but he was one of the best. I mean, Kevin Garnett may be the best power forward of all time, depending on who you ask, and what their preference be, and what you know uh, statistics they're using to measure. But Kevin Garnett and the Minnesota Timberwolves were great. Glenn Taylor's the owner of the team, and the basketball world is strange in that when you come up and you aspire to play for a basketball team, you don't even really think about who the owner is. I mean, if we're being honest, maybe there's some kid out there who's a unicorn and he's all into the back research of who the owner is and what their politics are and all of that. But when you're a young kid from the Rondo community, you just want to make it. And I don't care how it happens. And that's part of the false gold of the dream in and of itself, is like there are a lot of things that go into making it, and there are a lot of things that happen once you make it that you never think about on the journey, because who's there to prepare you for that? Basketball coaches usually teach you the game, and that's the gist of it. But yeah, it was so interesting to me to find out when I found out that Glenn Taylor is the owner of the Minnesota Star Tribune, and even more interesting that he's a former Minnesota Republican state legislator. He was the minority leader of the Minnesota Senate, 1985 through 87. So he had a 2-year bid, and then he was still in the Senate, but he wasn't the minority leader. But he served in the Senate from 1981 to 1990. Um, it's just interesting, and I think about it, and of course, he went to Minnesota State University, Mankato, and then he went to Harvard, right? And these Harvard guys, nothing against you Harvard guys, but it's like a recurring theme. I keep it's it's always Harvard. I mean, and I say that because, again, you just got to ask yourself. Let me blow this up here so you can see a little bit better. And we'll make sure that we get this a little bit more organized so that this is easier to see, because I know it wasn't that easy to see right there. But anyway, it blows my mind. It really does. It kind of blows my mind that uh, a former Minnesota senator, former Minnesota State Senator, Republican, is the owner of one of the farthest leaning left newspapers in the entire country. And I guess in response on social media when I brought up this fact that Glenn Taylor is one of the biggest donors to the Republican Party in the entire state of Minnesota. I mean, so one of our biggest donors is also the owner of one of the farthest left-leaning newspapers in the entire country, and it is. I mean, in Minnesota, again, it's a running joke that it should be called the Red Star because it's so democratic socialist, and we know that one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness. It's code word or dog whistle for communist sympathizers, and that's what they are. But how does that happen? And I just say it again today to reiterate when I talk about the Minnesota Republican establishment, when I talk about the Rhino establishment, when I talk about being in the belly of the beast, when I talk about the Uniparty, Minnesota may be one of the greatest examples of Uniparty politics in the entire country, which is even more of a uh, even more of a compliment to how much success we had in 2024 with my U.S. Senate campaign because, and I'm not saying Glenn Taylor specifically, but certainly his newspaper hasn't written a positive thing about me, not a single positive thing about me. Now, Glenn Taylor could easily say, hey, I knew Royce or I knew of Royce when he was in high school at 18 and he was still getting in trouble, or, I know who Royce's, I don't know, friends are, or whatever the case. I don't know what he would really say about me, but it's there's nothing that I've done in my past that disqualifies me for running for office. Certainly not anything more corrupt than the DC politicians that are in office today, and certainly not anything more corrupt than the Ivy League institutions and their power brokers have done to this country over the last 40 to 50 years. I mean, if you want to measure the corruption of me as an individual versus the Harvard graduates of the world and what they've thought up in their, in their political bubble or echo chamber, it doesn't even come close. And you dig a little deeper and you find how many ties Glenn Taylor has to China, and you start to ask yourself, like, what is going on? What is it? I get it. People want to do business in China. Okay. I mean, I got it. But, does your newspaper have to be so overwhelmingly uh, leftist, Democrat leaning? It's horrifying, really. It's like right there in 2014, Glenn Taylor bought the Star Tribune for about $100 million. And then the Star Tribune has recently gone from the Minneapolis Star Tribune to the Minnesota Star Tribune. It's the newspaper of record. It always has been, even when it was the Minneapolis Star Tribune, more or less. The Pioneer Press was also a big newspaper now, not doing so well by my read of things, but still around. But the Star Tribune has become the newspaper of record. And again, you couldn't find a more left-leaning newspaper in the entire country. In the entire country, just uniparty politics to the max. To the max. Yeah, you ask yourself, you go, our number one donor in the Republican Party, of the Republican Party in Minnesota, or at least one of the big donors, one of the big wigs of the Minnesota Republican donor base, is the owner of the Red Star, a communist newspaper. How does that even happen? And why doesn't a Glenn Taylor see it fit to have the same political sway or influence on his newspaper that the rest of these billionaires do on whatever it is that they're involved in, whatever industry they have influence in? Why is Glenn Taylor not being, more active? Maybe his argument could be, hey, I'm a billionaire. We have our own politics in the billionaire class. I don't really give a shit one way or another. I can straddle the fence because I'm a billionaire. I can buy a newspaper for $100 million if I want to. I don't know what his net worth is here. It's got to be upwards of $10 billion if you can just drop $100 million on a newspaper. But again, I mean, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I'm dealing with in Minnesota. Former Minnesota Republican state senators, now billionaire owner former owner of a professional sports team, and current owner of the newspaper of record that can't write a single positive thing about President Trump at all. You think it's by accident that the Minnesota Republican Party had a panel about the future of the party, and all the people who also oppose President Trump were in it? And here we go again. We're going to name names. Vin Weber, Counsel on Foreign Relations, Secretary of the House Republican Conference. That was from 89 to 93. He was also a U.S. House representative, of course, from 81 to 93. So for 12 years, he served in the U.S. House of Representatives. And his constituency was the 6th district. He was in the 6th district for 2 years. And then he was in the 2nd district. Now Angie Craig is the 2nd district representative and running in the U.S. Senate race. She's a Democrat. But, I mean, let's just look. And I hate to bring up Wikipedia because you shouldn't even trust Wikipedia. But here again is a picture of Vin Weber. See, he was born in 52, 73 years old. Still a big player, obviously, because when the Minnesota Star Tribune talks about the future of the Republican Party, the first quote they have is, Counsel on Foreign Relations, Vin Weber. Okay, he was a press secretary for Representative Tom Hagedorn, maybe related to, I'm not sure, Jim Hagedorn, who was recently passed away, was one of our representatives and passed away. And his husband, his wife was Jennifer Carnahan, who you all may or may not know, but she was the chair of the party at one point. There was a lot of controversy around Jennifer Carnahan and her fundraising. She was involved with, or she was, had affiliation, like a number of these Republicans did before I got there, with Tony Lavarro, who was running a porn agency and, is convicted of dealing with underage girls in that porn business, and he was a huge, huge donor to the party. I'm sure he thought it would buy him some political sway or capital, whatever the case may be. I'm not saying people knew that what he was involved in, because it's easy not to know what people are involved in. It's easy to conceal some of these things. But Jennifer Carnahan was married to a Hagedorn. I'm not sure if it was Tom's son, but it wouldn't surprise me, because politics has a way of staying in the family, and especially, state politics. So, but anyway, Vin Weber was the press secretary for Tom Hagedorn, and then he was a senior aide to Senator Rudy Boschwitz from 77 to 1980. And I don't want to talk bad about Rudy Boschwitz, because the first time I met Rudy at a Republican Party event, he walked right up to me. And he handed me his card. Now Rudy is getting up there. Rudy's in his 90s. And, he's 90. I mean, being 90 is being 90. So when anybody asks me about the Republican establishment, I always give Rudy a little bit of grace, because when you get to that age, similar to Joe Biden, it's hard to hold their feet to the fire about anything. I mean, you're declining. You're in decline. You're in the last chapter of your life. But, Rudy is very, very pro-Republican establishment. It just is what it is. It is what it is. And I say that because the people who came underneath Rudy, the people who are still underneath Rudy, are probably carrying on that legacy. In fact, I know they're carrying on that legacy, because Rudy Boschwitz was one of the people who endorsed my primary opponent last year in the last cycle, Joe Frazier, who was unlimited Ukraine funding, didn't really support President Trump or the MAGA movement, talked about this far right problem in our party. And so, Vin Weber, again, I go down here as Secretary of the House Republican Conference and key advisor to incoming Speaker Newt Gingrich. He was considered one of the architects of the Republican success in 1994. He was a commentator on NPR, back when NPR let Republicans talk, and I'm sure they still do, but more or less, we all know NPR is another rag, another far left dominated progressive sort of faking the funk milk toast centrist rag. And they probably still let Vin Weber come on there. And the type of Republicans that NPR let come on and talk are the same type of Republicans that the Minnesota Star Tribune will allow on their panels. So he worked for NPR. And I'm just reading through some of this. And I hate to do this because you can only take Wikipedia with a grain of salt. For example, on my Wikipedia, at one point it said Royce White, American conspiracy theorist. So that tells you that this stuff is pretty loose, and you'd have to double check it. But for the basic information, like I did go to Iowa State. I was born in Minnesota. I did get drafted to the NBA. I did play professionally in Canada. I did run for United States Senate for the Republican Party. Some of this basic information tends to be pretty accurate. Weber was a member of the now defunct Project for the New American Century and was one of the signers of PNAC letters sent to U.S. President Bill Clinton on January 26, 1998, advocating the removal of Saddam Hussein's regime from power. I mean, there you go. I mean, that kind, and this is the first time I've even read this. I mean, I just had Vin Weber's profile pulled up to be able to show you who he is, but one of the signers of the letter to President Bill Clinton advocating the removal of Saddam Hussein's regime from power. In 1998, this is the military-industrial complex, along with Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and 29 other notable Republicans. I mean, can you imagine if President Trump had his name signed to a letter that we could look at ex post facto that was involved with somebody as corrupt as Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld have been found to be, in retrospect? Can you imagine if they went back in retrospect and found President Trump's signature next to people who we now most agree are as corrupt as Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld? And this is who Vin Weber is. See, but when the Star Tribune has Vin Weber on, right, when the Star Tribune has Vin Weber quotes, they don't preface it by saying he signed a letter to remove Saddam Hussein from power in 1998 with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. They don't say that in the newspaper because they don't think it's noteworthy, I guess. They're quick to mention that I was accused of financial, campaign finance violations at a strip club for $1,200 that was already solved and reimbursed, and it was a mix-up with a credit card, and I've explained that 1,000 times. But, they feel the need to reiterate that time and time again every time they write a story that has to do with me. But they never mention that a Vin Weber signed a document given to Bill Clinton advocating for the removal of Saddam Hussein's regime from power. And the scary part is then they'll put an article out, they'll highlight Vin Weber as the authority on the Minnesota Republican Party, turn around and advocate for Tim Walz, who makes the claim that white people are, a plague to society because we are, the post-colonial remnant, and racism is informed all of our policy and all of our involvement around the world. I mean, that's what the narrative is. This is what I said yesterday. We have a couple of choices. We can either draw a line and hold the line, or we can hang on for dear life as we're pulled to the far left slowly but surely. Those are the only options we have. We can hold the line, or we can hang on for dear life while we're dragged over the line, Overton window, to the far left, eventually, inevitably. And that's what the Star Tribune does. This is what the entire neoconservative movement, and it's interesting to see Vin Weber right here associated with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. Doesn't get any more clear neoconservative than that. And the entire neoconservative movement got its start with people who were, Trotskyite communists. So it makes sense that when I ask the question, what has the conservative movement really conserved? What is the conservative movement really conserved when the American public is or some portion of the American public is so indifferent and apathetic about the dangers of communism that the Democrat socialists are openly parading around, palling around, associating with the Communist Party of America with no fear of reprisal at all. That's what we've conserved. That's what the conservative movement did. And how they did it was, don't say any profanity. Don't use the word fuck because we're Christian. And we need these Christian conservatives and evangelicals. We need these Christians to support us if we say all the right things. They're a reliable voter bloc. And that's all it's about. These people aren't conservatives. They didn't conserve shit. They're not conserving anything. You can make an argument they're communists because look what they've been a part of. They have been a part of a controlled opposition that pretends to be conservative, but under their tutelage, we slowly get pulled over, to the left. They even use the policy that these people help push to make the claim against these people for their racism. It's ridiculous. And most of us don't agree with the removal of Saddam Hussein in retrospect. Look at what happened to Iraq. Look at what happened there in Syria. Look at what happened, what's continued to go on in the Middle East. Look what happened to Libya. I love when President Trump just came right out and said, the removal of Gaddafi wasn't a net positive. It's not a comment about Gaddafi and whether he was a good person or bad person. Most of us don't know. It was under the behind the curtain of Libya's national sovereignty. We don't know what went on in Libya other than what the surveillance state tells us. He might not have been a good guy. He might have been a terrible guy. Might have been a tyrant. Maybe he wasn't. I don't know. I don't live in Libya. Don't really too much care other than the fact that our tax dollars went to overthrow him, went in an operation to fund him, help him, work with him, then overthrow him, then leave a terrorist state there in Libya that we are supposed to go and fix. And then when all is said and done, we get stuck with we get stuck with the tab of going to fix the place that we helped break, only to have the Star Tribune say it's an example of white supremacy. I mean, this is the ultimate racket. It's the ultimate racket. Let's read a little bit more here. Weber is a prominent strategist in the Republican Party, serving as a top advisor on Dole for president in 1996, the Bush reelection campaign in 2004, and Mitt Romney for president in 2008. I mean, Weber is chairman of the National Endowment for Democracy. There you go. There it is. A private nonprofit organization designed to strengthen democratic institutions around the world through non-governmental efforts. I mean, come on, guys. The National Endowment for Democracy? Are you kidding me? It doesn't get more globalist than the national. It doesn't get more globalist than this. Honestly, it really is horrifying. The National Endowment for Democracy is a globalist rag. National Security Decision Directive 77. I mean, there's an entire world here that you got to get down into, and maybe we'll do it here on Thursday. But it's a very, very active, very powerful NGO. Very, very powerful. I can't even. I right now I'm almost in shock because again I'm reading down here for the first time, and you see I'm telling you this, and I say this honestly because some of us just have an intuition for these things. That's why I'm running for United States Senate. I just have an intuition. All I have to do is read, your quote in the Star Tribune, go and look up who you worked for and where you're coming from, and I could imagine what you were involved with. I don't really know Vin Weber's history that well, other than that he was on the Council of Foreign Relations. He used to be a board of directors of Council of Foreign Relations. But if just by knowing that, it doesn't shock me that he's the chair of the National Endowment for Democracy, or he was the chair for the National Endowment. No, it says is chairman of the National Endowment for Democracy. And what is it with these Republicans that have such a strange obsession with democracy? There are two forms of political philosophy that are kind of competing. There's democracy and there's republicanism. There's having a democracy and there's having a republic. Now in America, we tried to kind of merge the two, and we kind of, join the two to try and get the best of both worlds. But man, I sure do see a lot of Republicans that have a strange affinity for the term democracy. And there is great heresy to democracy. Our founding fathers understood this. The heresy of democracy is that all majorities are made righteous, all majorities are made equal. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. In fact, if you're a Christian, if you believe in God, if you believe in Christ, if you believe in original sin, if you believe in the fallen nature of man, then if you believe in the story of Christ, the crucifixion of Christ, then you know deep, deep down in your spirit, you know that the tendency is for the group to get it wrong. The tendency is for the majority, for the mob, to have it wrong. The tendency is for the sole individual, for whatever strange reason, has some more clarity, whether it be spiritually, socially, scientifically, whatever the case may be. The individual who has more clarity, for whatever strange reason, has to speak out against the majority in order to force the majority to see things a different way. That's the President Trump story, not to liken him to Christ, but that's the President Trump story. And it's any prophetic person in human history. Any of the leaders or the icons or the idols that we look up to and revere were people who spoke out. It's our founding fathers. There was the entirety of Europe, the monarchy, the West, the Westphalian nation state of Europe was content with their European life and with the monarchical structure and whatnot. And our founding fathers broke away and said, we have a problem. We have a problem. Here's our list of problems, and here's what we think it should be. I mean, that is courageous by courageous standards. But there is a heresy to democracy, a great heresy to democracy. And right now, President Trump is fighting that. He has to fight the narrative of the machine from the mainstream media all the way to the National Endowment for Democracy, chaired by Vin Weber, first person to get quoted in the Star Tribune about the future of the Republican Party. President Trump right now has to fight against the narrative that all majorities are made righteous and equal. And they'll even manufacture a majority when necessary, and that's even more dangerous. That's what's even more dangerous about majorities is not only that they're not always equal and righteous, that they don't always get it right, but that you can manufacture a perception of a democratic consensus that doesn't really exist. Like we saw MSNBC this week show a video footage of a protest that happened back in 2018, but they represented it as though it was happening on No King's Day this past week. Manufacturing a consensus through the mainstream media. I mean, this is the problem here. And again, I just go through this to show you guys what we're really dealing with. Weber's the chairman of the National Endowment for Democracy. Very powerful, think tank. And if you go down here, you find there's several private sector and nonprofit. He's a lobby. He was a board member. He was a board member, which means he's a power broker, and he was a lobbyist. And, he was at the board on several private sector nonprofit organizations. I mean, this guy is like, the Michael Jordan of the nonprofit sector. You got the ITT Technical Institute, Department 56, the Aspen Institute, the Council on Foreign Relations. What else do we got right here? Co-chaired the Independent Task Force on U.S. Policy toward Reform in the Arab World with former United States Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. In addition, Weber is a member of the United States Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board. The United States Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board. I mean, this is as high up as it gets. Weber was one of the Republicans who turned against the surprise Donald Trump candidacy, telling CNBC on August 3rd, 2016, "I can't imagine I'd remain a Republican if he becomes president." I mean, I'm just reading this for the first time, guys. I'm telling you, wait a second. I mean, this is golden. And I promise you, I'm just reading this for the first time. I know who Vin Weber is. I'm in the Minnesota Republican Party. I've looked through the Council on Foreign Relations stuff. I know which office he served in. I know the rudimentaries of who Vin Weber is, and I know that he helped Tom Emmer get his start. And I know that when the Minnesota Star Tribune asks a question about the future of the Republican Party, for some reason, they view this guy as the authority. And what's even more scary, there are a lot of Minnesota Republicans that are none the wiser. But they'll also say that they support President Trump or that they're MAGA. And that's interesting because here we have a guy who said to CNBC on August 3rd, 2016, I can't imagine I'd remain a Republican if President Trump becomes president. I can't even imagine I'd remain a Republican if Donald Trump becomes president. Then in 2019, Weber said the Trump administration was not as bad as he thought, and that he would probably support Trump for reelection. Right? I mean, that's the story of all of them. But their initial impetus is to reject President Trump, and I say that because, oh, well, this is interesting. See also the Podesta Group, Tony and John Podesta, another lobbying group hired by Paul Manafort and Rick Gates from 2012. Well, let's just go on an adventure here. Okay, well, I'm not even going to go into the Pope Podesta thing because that's a rabbit hole in and of itself, but I'm not sure if he was involved in the Podesta Group or, oh, here we go. He was involved with Manafort and Gates firms connected to his party of regions were subpoenaed by the Mueller special counsel investigation. Okay. So that's all about the Mueller investigation. Obviously, Weber was involved in that somehow. Anyway, see also in his reference the Stop Trump movement. There's a Stop Trump movement, and Vin Weber's name is attached. I mean, come on. So this is my point, right? I mean, the Minnesota Star Tribune can act all they want to. It's not working on me. I mean, certainly not working on me. It doesn't faze me at all. That's why I told you yesterday, when I see this long list of names of these Minnesota Republican establishment folks, I'm inspired. I'm motivated. I'm licking my chops. I'm going, I'm doing it right. I'm doing something right. I'm the MAGA way. I'm more MAGA than these people are. And when is the Vin Weber going to speak out about Tom Emmer? When are the Jim Nashes or the Kathleen Folks or any of these individuals going to speak out about Tom Emmer? Surely he's considered far right-wing Republican as well, a MAGA Republican, right? I mean, he's got his MAGA hat. He's all gung-ho about President Trump now. He's all supportive of President Trump and Doge and closing the border and everything else that's going on. That's been accomplished with this administration. So why isn't Tom Emmer considered far right? Because Tom Emmer is a pair of steady hands. Tom Emmer, a pair of steady hands, they all know what it means in D.C. The steady hands are the people that will forego the moral or ethical consideration in the interest to preserve the corruption, the status quo. Tom Emmer's one of them. Vin Weber's one of them. But they don't support President Trump. And it's only my hope that President Trump can see it. That President Trump can see it, and over the course of this next, 12 months, that there is a MAGA crackdown in the Republican Party. When I say a crackdown, we're not going to arrest people and lock them up, but what we are going to do is make it very clear, that these people are MAGA and these people aren't. Now, if somebody wants to argue whether or not I'm MAGA, fine, be my guest, no problem. And I would invite any one of them to debate under any set of rules, anytime, any place. Anytime, any place, under any set of rules, I would invite that. I would really. It'd be my life's great excitement, the greatest excitement of my life, to be able to debate or talk about policy with some of these people. Let's talk about what MAGA means. That's why I enjoyed, when Tom Emmer's son, Trip Emmer, jumped on my ex and talked about the romanticism of Trumpism. I don't think any real MAGA people talk about the romanticism of Trumpism, to be honest. Not any that I talk to or hang out with. The Steve Bannons and the Jack Posobics of the world, or the Matt Gaetz of the world, or the Kerry Lakes of the world, all of these people who are very supportive of President Trump, diehard supporters of President Trump, never talk about the romanticism of the Donald Trump movement. No, we talk about the the brass tack of the President Trump and MAGA movement. We talk about the logical consistency, the legitimacy, the legitimacy in foreign policy of of President Trump and the MAGA movement. We don't talk about the romanticism of it. See, but that's that's what we're up against, and I hope we can figure that out. So, I hope you enjoyed this Tuesday episode. Let me see if I got anything. Okay, hold on, wait a second. Kelly Fenton, here we go. I know I had a few more. Now, Kelly Fenton was also quoted in yesterday's Star Tribune article of saying, essentially, if Royce White is on the ballot, first of all, Royce White should be deemed unfit to run. I should be unfit. This woman's telling me I'm unfit to do anything is absolutely crazy. Royce White should be deemed unfit to run. And if he's on the ballot, a lot of people will concede to the Democrat. I mean, for a Republican to even say that in the state of Minnesota, where our current governor is Tim Walz and our two senators are Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar, and our prospective senator from the Democrat side is Protect Trans Kids with a Knife, Peggy Flanagan, for a Republican, former House representative and former deputy chair of the Minnesota Republican Party to say, to even entertain a concession to a Democrat versus a Republican on the ballot in November, next November, is reprehensible. And you're looking at part of the reason why I underperform President Trump, because there's a lot of people who probably take Kelly Fenton's opinion as credible. Maybe they don't read what she says in the Star Tribune. Maybe they missed that quote. Maybe they don't really know Kelly Fenton that well, other than that she was their representative as a Republican and she served as deputy chair of the Minnesota Republican Party. And for that reason, she's kind of a stalwart of the Minnesota Republican establishment. And they don't really know her or know the Republican Party inside more than when they get their mailer, their Republican Party mailers or their emails, which, again, you can craft a narrative. You can craft a consensus when you're in control of the story that people get, which is why I'm doing this. And hopefully you're bearing with me here. You're probably thinking to yourself, who gives a shit about Kelly Fenton? Kelly Fenton is another one of the people that the Minnesota Star Tribune, the Minnesota Red Star go to for comment about the future of the Republican Party in our United States Senate races and candidates. So it is important. When your newspaper of record, who the New York Times go to ask questions about the future of our country, is very important. Now, a lot of us in the MAGA world would just dismiss it and say, well, if they're asking her, then she's probably not credible. But there's some in-between Republicans that still haven't gotten there yet. This woman, Kelly Fenton, used to be a House representative, and she basically said if Royce is on the ballot versus the Democrat, Peggy Flanagan, then most people will concede to the Democrat. What a thing to say. Kelly Fenton. And I'm just showing you. And Jim Nash. There you go. Now they're asking Jim Nash to run. And, Jim Nash says all the right things. He's being mentored by Tom Emmer. Tom Emmer knows how to stay exactly on the right side of the Republican cultural wedge issues so he can maintain his constituency and the narrative in his respective district. Same thing with Jim Nash. And if you scroll down here, to be a state senator, you only have to get 10,000 votes, right? And he's in a Republican district, obviously, but it's not a deeply, deeply Republican district. There were 16,000 votes in his last election. And wait a second. Let's see here. Let's scroll all the way down to 2022. There were 21,000 votes in the entire election, and he got 59% of the vote, 13,000 votes. But he got 13,000 votes. That makes sense. He's a state senator. He's not going to have tens of thousands of votes anyway. But for him to try and question my political, viability, I received 1.3 million votes. Why didn't you run for U.S. Senate against Amy Klobuchar? If you believe that the Democrats are as radical as you say, why didn't you step up to the plate and run against Amy Klobuchar? Now they only call him to run for U.S. Senate because I'm running again to try and thwart me. And it's going to be him and Kathleen Folk. They're going to run two more Never Trump neocons out there to try and water down the vote. And this is the game that's played. And they got to get somebody who already holds an office. Their hope is that his constituents in his respective area or the people who are connected to him up the ladder, like Tom Emmer, will obviously throw their support behind him, and that'll sway enough of people in the primary to get him the victory. Knowing he has no chance whatsoever of winning in the general, no chance at all. He has no chance. And where he has a chance, he is conceding ground on the conservative position. Tell me why Jim Nash would think that he's any better suited to run for United States Senate if the key issues are going to be about the Second Amendment or pro-life, abortion or all the other things that have been a part of his platform the entire time. He has no plans on winning. He has no plans on changing that message. He can't change that message. He's been in office now for, since 2015. Now, he's been in office for 10 years. The things that he's ran on have probably been more or less the same in his respective district for a long time. And if the argument is that Royce is too far right, President Trump is too far right to win, I mean, you have the same positions. You have the same positions. You just don't like people who actually believe in it, or more importantly, people who will bring up other issues that will maybe help change people's minds that these issues might not be the most important. Let's look at his position on abortion. Here we go. Let's see here. Didn't bring me. Okay. Nash signed on to a letter calling on Attorney General Lori Swanson to investigate Planned Parenthood for allegedly selling fetal body parts and called on the University of Minnesota to stop participating in research on aborted human fetal organs. He has criticized the DFL's abortion rights policies as overreaching and an abomination. And I'm not saying that I don't agree with him, because I do. But the point I'm making is, which Minnesota constituency that the Minnesota Republican Party says, need to stay away from these conservative wedge issues, which constituency is he aiming for? These people are just not honest. They're really not honest. And I would hope that we're starting to catch wind of it. If not, I can only tell you what it says. And you can go read it for yourself. That's the other cool thing about it. And I like having the ability to bring a lot of this stuff up and give you this material firsthand, because it tells you a great story about politics in Minnesota. And I just think that when you really read through some of this stuff, it's clear what's going on. It's clear what's going on. We're being played. We're getting used. We're getting used here. I want to read a little bit more here before we end. We got about 10 minutes. I want to read a little bit more here. I was able to find an article in the archives of Columbia. Even Columbia. My great-great-uncle was the dean of the dentistry school there at Columbia from 1927 to 1933. And Columbia is the bastion of New World Order. It really is. Columbia is just horrifying as an institution, really. It couldn't be more globalist and secular humanist than Columbia. But anyway, Alfred Oury, College of Dental Medicine, Dean, 1927 to 33. And there's a picture of my uncle right there. I'll try and blow it up so you can see it a little bit better. But, as you can see, it doesn't get no more white than Uncle Alfred. There's not a more white name than Alfred, really. But look at him. He's a clean dude. He was clean. He was a doctor. He was an MD and a dentist. And he had a profound impact on dental science and the medical community in our entire country. Lived from 1870 to 1933. Let's read a little bit about him here. Alfred Oury, who served as dean of the College of Dental Medicine, 1927 to 1933, arrived at Columbia with much promise, only to leave in a cloud of controversy. A few years later, perhaps no other leader of the university's health sciences school has had such a tumultuous tenure. Okay, and here I'll show you why he was. Let's read a little bit about his background. Born in 1870 in Hammerfest, Norway, while his immigrant parents were paying a visit to their homeland, Oury was raised in Norway and Minnesota. He graduated from the University of Minnesota with both medical and dental degrees, and after a few years of private practice, joined the faculty of the University of Minnesota Dental School. By 1902, he was a full professor, and 3 years later was named dean. So, I mean, he shot up quick. He went from being faculty at the dental school to being the dean in 3 years. Uncle Alfred was an ambitious man, as we can further on read here. And I say this because, again, this tells you how duplicitous the mainstream media is. The Star Tribune won't even mention this, that this is my great uncle. They know. They know who my family is. They know they can read right on my birth certificate, right? They know exactly who I am, and they know exactly who my relatives are. They won't mention that because they don't want to credentialize, they don't want to credentialize me of having a very relevant political family or education, family and education, Minnesota education, most of all. Oury was a strong advocate for strengthening the standards of American dental education. In the early 20th century, American dentistry was still plagued by for-profit schools, commercial enterprises that were more interested in whether students could pay rather than being able to do the work, as I think we have some of that problem still today. As late as 1925, only 16 of 44 U.S. dental schools required even a high school diploma for admission. So it was a very pay-to-play game. In 1908, Oury was one of the founders of the Dental Faculties Association of American Universities, an organization devoted to promoting scientific dental education in opposition to the commercial schools. When in 1921, the Carnegie Foundation decided to conduct a survey of American and Canadian dental education under the leadership of Columbia University biochemist and dental educator William J. Guise, Oury was one of the survey's consultants. All this boded well for Oury's reception at Columbia when he arrived in 1927 to lead the dental school. Like the University of Minnesota, Columbia's dental school was fully integrated into a university and had close ties to the medical school. Though only founded in 1916, the School of Dental and Oral Surgery, as the College of Dental Medicine was then called, had recently strengthened itself with its 1923 merger with the older and better established College of Dental and Oral Surgery of New York. However, and here comes the controversy, Oury had already made known his strong belief that dentistry should be a specialty of medicine rather than its own profession. When it was published in 1926, the Guise Report on Dental Education came out against this strategy for a variety of practical reasons. Oury also advocated for having routine dental work left to well-trained technicians, supervised by university-educated dentists who would concentrate on the more difficult surgical and medical issues of the oral cavity. Neither of his stances were in the mainstream of American dental opinion. So it goes on to tell you, and this is all about his journey and kind of being ostracized for his views and whatnot. But Uncle Alfred Oury, very influential in the field of medicine and specifically dentistry and in our American history. But I only brought him up to say, look at my great uncle. He's white as snow. Am I to hate Alfred Oury because he was white, because he was Norwegian? No, I don't hate him. Never knew him. Obviously died in 1933. He was my grandmother's mother's uncle, and he was probably the oldest of their brothers and sisters. So he was old. But I don't hate them. I don't hate the Norwegian ancestry, heritage in my blood, no more than I do the Mexican. And I'm always proud to say that I'm black, and by statistical standards, I'm black. I'm probably 75% black. My father is 100% black. But why would I hate all white people? Why would I hate Mexicans or Latinos? There's no hatred. There's no hatred at all. But I will speak honestly about all of them. And to take you all the way back to the beginning here, I will speak honestly about anything I talk about. I'm going to be honest. And if I'm being honest, we got a problem, Houston, with black folks. This shit is a fucking problem. A real problem. That shit is a problem, Houston. And I'm black. White liberals, we got problems. Scandinavian culture, hell, Scandinavia has problems. Speaking of my ancestry, Norway's got problems. First of which is they've completely given over to egalitarian government and egalitarian policies, and the egalitarianism doesn't actually work. It didn't do what they thought it was going to do. The women sorted themselves into professions that you would suspect they would, and the men sorted themselves into professions that you would suspect they would. And they now ended up with chips. You know, they're testing out chips there in Norway and Scandinavia, and they're not self-determining. The people aren't self-determining, but the nations aren't self-determining. The nations are dependent and relying upon an American military-industrial complex. That's not sovereignty. That's a protectorate. So Norway has problems, and they have a collapsing birth rate on top of it. Not only do they have political problems, fundamental political problems, they have a collapsing birth rate, as does much of Western society. Hey, South America's got problems. The Latino world has problems. Drugs, crime, corruption, despots, warlords, governments that are involved in the drug trade, problems. See how I can just talk honest about all three groups? It's not an issue. It's nothing. It is what it is. It is what it is. But I wanted to bring this up today, and I'm going to continue to push on this. Remember, Normal series is like, and we'll go out here to the end of this song. Just a little bit more left here. This was Normal. It's going to go out to this right here. Royce, I want to get next to you. What happened to the black community? What happened to Normal? It's been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio, powered by our favorite sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us. Help fund the movement. Help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I'm your host, Royce White, live from the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we appreciate your viewership and listenership today and in the future. Tuesdays, Thursdays, 9 p.m. Central. Now we're going to be going to a daily show. I hope to be king of the late night hour in the conservative podcast world. Shout out to the War Room Posse, the great Maureen Bannon, Grace Chong, Cameron, obviously my friend and mentor, Steve Bannon, for continuing to stream the podcast on their War Room platforms. We really appreciate it. Especially that I'm shadow banned. And the reason why I'm shadow banned to end is because I'm reasonable. And they have to do everything they can to paint the MAGA movement and President Trump supporters as crazy, illogical, extreme. We're not that extreme. I challenge anybody to go through this entire 2-hour podcast and find any inkling that I'm unstable or unfit to run for public office. And I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I think I'd be very well suited for public office myself, especially knowing what I know about a lot of the DC elite that we have now, people like Vin Weber and whatnot. But hey, that's for the people to decide. And that's what makes our country great. And that's what makes a constitutional republic great is people get the government they deserve. I hope to be able to represent you here from the state of Minnesota, but really the American people writ large. Every United States Senate race is a national race, and we see that right now, most of all, with the government shutdown, and we're having problems still, even in the Republican Senate, and on the Republican side, getting President Trump's agenda, his real agenda, through and passed through law, as well as with the judges and the judiciary. So, we're in an all-out dogfight, like I've said many times, and I hope to be able to help President Trump and the MAGA movement, the America First movement from the United States Senate. But hey, if I'm too extreme, if I swear too much, if I'm too black or not black enough or too mixed or too Norwegian or too Mexican or I wear my beard too scruffy, Whatever it is that you may have a problem with, so be it. So be it. We all get the government we deserve. We all get to decide how the country burns now. The country can either burn in a revolution of some strange warped ideology, or we can just remember normal. Remember normal. I want to get next to you. There was a time in this country where things were looking up, and we should have held on to that and conserved that, and we didn't. We let things get out of control like they are now. We'll see you tomorrow night. Reaction show. We're going to have many more clips tomorrow, a lot of video clips. It's been so long since I did a reaction show, and now I can do the whole thing here from my laptop, so I hope you like that new setup and being able to interact with the content with me. We're going to have a lot of videos for tomorrow's reaction show. Plan on probably an hour and a half at least, because there's so much to go over, especially the fake protest footage from MSNBC. But there's also some other gems out there, like Tapper, for example, throwing down on, I think, Catherine Clark he had on, and he's telling her, by all standards, by the way we've covered government shutdowns and the party who's willing to sign the CR bill, the Democrats are responsible for this shutdown. I mean, these are just incredible times we're living in here in America, and especially in politics. So we'll see you tomorrow night for another episode of Please Call Me Crazy. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Godspeed, God bless you, and God bless America. Everything's up on the bar. We're all in. We get to decide. Do you want to live on your knees, or do you want to die on your feet fighting? That's the decision you get to make now.